Okay, I am so excited about today's case. I feel like every true crime junkie has a story that started it all, and for me, this is that one. This is one of probably, if not the most controversial case in New Zealand history, and there are two types of people in this country. There's the group that think that David did it and the group that think that Robin did it. The story is huge and there is so much to break down and understand to kind of get the full spectrum of why it creates so much controversy. So in order to make sure I cover everything in as much detail as possible, I am breaking this series up into 3 parts. So today I am covering the story of the Bain Family Murders, probably the most famous case in New Zealand history. Once I've been through all 3 parts, at the very end, when all the information is out there, I'll share my own personal views and who I think did it. I just love this story. I'm wearing my own David Bain style jumper in honor of this tale, and it even causes controversy in my own family. My mum and I disagree on who did it. My best friend and I disagree on who did it. So I am looking forward to hearing your guys' thoughts about who you think did it. So if you're new here, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell so you get notified every time I release a new video. I cover all kinds of true crime here, so solved cases, unsolved, missing persons. So I promise you will not be disappointed. You can always change your mind later, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Alright, so let's get straight into it. On Sunday, June 19th, 1994, in Dunedin, New Zealand, the Bain family appeared a slightly odd but by no means disastrous family. Father Robin, aged 58, mother Margaret, 50, and their 4 children, Arawa, 19, Laniet, 18, Stephen, 14, and David, 22, were well liked and well respected by their peers in the community. But by the next morning, they were well on their way to being New Zealand's most notorious dysfunctional family. At 7:09 a.m. on the morning of June 20th, 1994, New Zealand police received a 111 call.
Help! They're all dead.
What's the matter?
They're all dead. I came home and they're all dead.
Whereabouts are you?
Every street.
Or every street?
65 every street. They're all dead.
Who's all dead?
My family, they're all dead. Hurry up.
It's okay. Every street. It runs off Somerville Street?
Yes.
What number are you calling from?
454. 2527.
454
2527.
2527. And your last name?
Bain.
Bain. Okay. We're on our way. Okay, Mr. Bain? Yeah, we'll be there very shortly.
The caller was 22-year-old David Bain, who'd been up at 5:30 a.m. that foggy and frosty morning to complete his paper round. When he arrived back home to his house on 65 Every Street, Anderson's Bay, he discovered his entire family had been shot dead in their beds. Jeff Wiley had been a police officer for 3.5 years when he and his partner Kim Stevenson, who'd been a cop for 5 years, got the call to go to the Bain house. When they arrived at Every Street, an ambulance was waiting outside number 65. Stevenson said he thought the call might be about a gas leak, but the sight of people ducking for cover behind the ambulance suggested otherwise. As the officers walked up the dark path towards the house, they saw a head and shoulders in one of the windows near the front door. This would turn out to be David Bain. Both constables were worried that the figure might start shooting, so they turned off their torches. From his position to the right of the front door, Wiley looked through the window, seeing a gap in some long curtains. He could see a firearm on the floor and a hand. Wiley and Stevenson were joined by Constable Les Andrews and Sergeant Murray Stapp. They armed themselves with .38 police revolvers and tried again to get David to open the door. David was too hysterical to let them in, and when Wiley asked where his father was, because the father is often responsible in these types of cases, David just pointed to the room across the hallway. The police realised that they'd have to break entry into the house. Stevenson gave the door 3 hard kicks, but it wouldn't budge, despite the house looking like it would blow over with a stiff breeze. Stapp broke a glass pane in the front door with a bit of firewood from the porch. Using the butt of his revolver, he cleared the glass from the door and reached in to open the door from the inside. The door was hard to open because there was stuff everywhere blocking the entrance. They pushed hard to get inside. The house was a total disaster. Weatherboards were rotting, windows had jammed, daylight could be seen through some of the walls, and maggots were crawling in the bathrooms. The Bain family were hoarders and collectors, so the grounds resembled a salvage yard, and rooms were piled high with household goods and bric-a-brac. Only the front room, just inside the front door, was kept reasonably tidy. It was used for family meetings and to host visitors. The house also had a really bad smell. The day's newspaper was sitting on a cabinet in the hallway, showing that despite the horrific events of that morning, somebody had still managed to perform a very mundane daily task. David was lying on the floor at the end of his bed in the fetal position. He was crying and he kept wailing that they're all dead, they're all dead. Constables began investigating the house with their revolvers raised. They asked David how many were in the house, and David said 6 of them, himself included. Stevenson entered the room opposite David's and discovered the body of Robin Bain lying on the floor with a .22 rifle at a right angle to him. He was fully clothed with a single bullet hole near his left temple. With the gun accounted for, the police thought they were probably dealing with a murder-suicide, as in cases like these, it's often the father. But immediately there were some details that stood out to the police. For example, the magazine of the rifle was sitting on its narrow edge right next to Robin Bain's hand. Wiley then shone his torch into the next room and discovered the body of Laniet Bain. She was lying under a duvet with 3 bullet wounds to her head, 1 through the top and 2 close to her left ear. On the right of the hallway, there was another room with a curtain across the entrance. Stapp pushed the curtain aside with the barrel of his gun and discovered the body of a woman lying under a duvet. He discovered the body of Margaret Bain, who'd been shot once, just above the left eye, as she lay asleep in bed. Stapp noticed another doorway in Margaret's room, but thought it must be a wardrobe, and decided not to investigate. With 3 bodies discovered on the upper floor, police walked down the staircase between David's room and Laniet's room to investigate further. When police got to the bottom, they arrived in the kitchen. It was derelict, dirty, and piled high with dishes. Wiley followed a narrow passageway. It was lined with shelves and bottled preserves that Margaret would make but failed to use before they went bad. He reached another door covered with 2 thick curtains, a net curtain and a curtain made with metal rings. He pulled the curtains back, looked inside, and discovered the body of Arawa Bain lying on the floor. The discovery of Arawa's body was particularly upsetting for police, who noted that she looked like she'd been begging for her life on her knees before she'd been shot. She'd been shot once in the right side of her forehead. The entire time, David was wailing upstairs. Stapp and Wiley went back upstairs, and Wiley yelled out that they'd found 4 bodies. Stevenson said that there should be 6, including David, so Stapp went back into Margaret's room for another look. This time, he checked out the curtain that he previously thought was a wardrobe, and he discovered another bedroom. Inside, he found Stephen Bain's body lying on the floor. Stephen had put up one hell of a fight. There'd been a major struggle and there was blood absolutely everywhere. He had 3 bullet wounds, 1 through the top of his head, 1 through the palm of his left hand, and 1 on the right side of his head. It seemed that David Bain was the only one who survived purely through the good fortune of being on his paper run. Meanwhile, David's weeping and wailing continued to make the police suspicious. David lay on the floor of his room, apparently incapable of responding. He started to shake like he was having a fit and fell backwards between the bed and the wall, but police noted that David's eyes did not show the typical signs of a seizure. There was no change and they stayed normal. Police took note of this because your eyes would usually react when fitting. The entire time, the police were struck by the musty, rotting smell of the house. Police pulled David out from his position between the bed and the wall and put him in the recovery position, where he then went limp. Police later said that they didn't have any difficulty removing David from his position down the side of the bed. He didn't bang his head or sustain any cuts and scrapes. This is important to note because it would later come up whether or not David sustained any injuries after the murders had happened. Ambulance officers were called in to check on David, and even though David had started shaking again, they couldn't find any signs of trauma or any injuries at all. All David's stats were normal. Even though David was presenting as unconscious, ambulance officers were able to determine that David was in fact conscious and was just resting with his eyes closed after they did an eyelid flutter test. Ambulance staff said they didn't believe that David's seizure was genuine. His shaking had been coordinated, and in a typical seizure, you would have an uncoordinated, violent shaking. They'd seen many fake fits before, and they knew what it looked like. So at this point, both police and ambulance officers believed that David was faking it. David asked for his glasses, and a pair with a missing lens was found on a chair in his bedroom. Just after that, the chief ambulance officer checked Robin and discovered that he was still very warm and came to the conclusion that he must have died in the last 60 to 90 minutes. The temperature of Robin's body suggested that he was the last to have been shot. When detectives arrived on the scene, they went into the lounge where Robin's body lay. There was a little alcove separated by a curtain where a desk and a computer were set up. Blood and brain tissue were seen splattered on the velvet green curtain. The computer was on and a single sentence was written on the screen. "Sorry, you were the only one who deserved to stay." Detective Ware showed up and took a look around the house. He went into Robin's caravan and noted that the light and radio was on, and there was a hot water bottle in his bed. Detectives conducted a preliminary examination of Stephen, who was in black underpants. He had a white t-shirt over the upper part of his body, and only one arm was in the sleeve of his t-shirt. He had been strangled with it before being shot. Stephen was covered in blood. It was smeared over his head, face, arms, legs, and all through his hair. Stephen had lost a lot of blood and the room was absolutely covered in it. When Stephen's mattress was removed, police discovered a white blood-stained glove underneath it. Underneath a green school jersey, they found the gloves pair. Both of them belonged to David, who'd bought them for a school ball. A lens that fitted the glasses in David's room was found 3 days later in Stephen's bedroom. David's room was the tidiest of them all and was thoroughly searched the day after the shootings. Inside, they found live bullets scattered all over the floor and 1,000 rounds of ammunition inside his wardrobe. The trigger lock to the .22 rifle was also on the floor. Downstairs in the bathroom and laundry, the washing machine had a smear of what looked like blood on the top left-hand side with a finished load inside. It contained a green sweatshirt, black skivvy, pale blue track pants, a pair of sports socks, and a pair of work socks. In a washing basket next to the machine, a sweatshirt had a blood stain on the arm. A box of washing powder on the top shelf in the laundry had a smear of blood on it, and there was a small bit of blood in the wash basin. Items on the shelves also had blood on them. In fact, there was blood all over the house. As the killer moved through the house in what turned out to be the green jersey that was inside the washing machine, they'd brushed up against pretty much all available surfaces. There was blood on the door jambs of Stephen, Margaret, and Arawa's bedrooms. There was blood on the light switch in Laniet's room and the stairwell. Police discovered 5 footprints made by a bloody sock, leaving Margaret's room and going in and out of Laniet's room. Extensive searches took place outside the house as well. In Robin's trailer, he had bunks, and on the bunks, police found a spent shell, and in the same area, a live .22 shell under a book called The Golden Stream. They found 20 old and spent .22 shells, an arms code, several radios, and 3 electric shavers. 2 books lay beside his bed, including a collection of murder stories by Agatha Christie. The Agatha Christie collection contained a particular short story about a father who was accused of killing his family, but it turns out it was the son who murdered his family for the inheritance. Which is pretty spooky that that's what he was reading when you consider what happened next. After the bodies were checked, the next job for the police is to secure and record the scene. One of the most crucial jobs for the police investigating the scene was to record it before bedclothes and items were moved to remove the bodies. But because the rooms were so closely packed and cluttered, it was difficult for them to move the bodies without disturbing surrounding articles. The main recording job fell to Trevor Gardner, a Dunedin senior constable and senior photographic technician who arrived at the Bain house at about 10 a.m. that morning. He left the police shortly after the Bain case. He was armed with a video and stills camera and first took video footage of the exterior of the house. He was then called into the house to first take video and then take photographs of the individual scenes where the bodies were found. The video, taken little more than 3 hours after the bodies were found, provided the most valuable footage because it showed the scenes virtually untouched. The photographs would reveal in graphic detail how the Bain family had lost their lives, but unfortunately they would not reveal who the killer was. David was removed from the house at about 10:30 and taken to the CIB office, examined by a police doctor and interviewed for about 3 hours. The interviewer, Detective Sergeant Greg Dunn, remembers David being very deliberate in his responses. He spoke with his eyes averted down, like he was remembering a scene. He spoke freely and was calm throughout. The only time he displayed any emotion was when the detective confirmed that his mother and father were dead. At that point, tears rolled down his cheeks and he covered his face with his hands. David didn't ask about his siblings. David's story at this stage was that he'd come home from his paper run, put a load of washing on, and then discovered first his mother and then his father dead. But there were some obvious problems with David's version of events. Firstly, in his 111 call, he told the operator they're all dead, but later he told police he'd only found his mother and father dead. David was home from his paper run by about 6:45 a.m, but he didn't call the police until 7:09 a.m, so it did raise the question of what he was doing during those 25 minutes. Police had other questions for David. Why did he go to his lounge after visiting his mother's room? It wasn't a bedroom, nobody slept there. How did he know his mother was dead and not just asleep? When police questioned David about these things, he couldn't answer. Regarding the missing 25 minutes, he just said that he'd been spacing out a lot lately. But David's story would dramatically change later. 4 days after the killings and 1 day before the funeral for the 5 slain family members, David Bain was arrested.
In a dramatic turn, 22-year-old David Colin Bain was this afternoon led into the district court. He's accused of shooting his entire family in cold blood. David Bain showed no emotion when he made a brief appearance in court late this afternoon. He entered no plea and was remanded in custody until July the 8th.
So in part 2, we will dive deep into the family's twisted background. This family was absolutely on a collision course and could only have ended in disaster. Understanding the full background behind this weird, insane, dysfunctional family helps give context to why this is such a controversial and talked about case in New Zealand today. So if you like this video, tell me your thoughts below. Have you heard of this case before? Do you have an opinion on who did it, whether it was David or Robin? Let me know in the comments box below. Stay tuned for next week where I will be sharing part 2 with you, and it is so good, it's so juicy. This family was insane and it is such a wild story. You cannot make this stuff up, so you're not going to want to miss that one. So make sure you hit subscribe and click the notification bell so you get notified the second that video drops. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I will see you next week. Bye.